When the war broke out, I was in Gravelburg, Saskatchewan. I spent 2 years there, and from there I was recruited to the Air Force. I trained in Brandon, Manitoba. In England, I did most of my training at Shipping Warden, and that was a repeat of previous training. I was trained as a navigator bomb aimer. I trained with 60 other bomb aimers and navigators. I wound up with a bomb aimer crew. It was a random selection. We were on parade, and they just said, you have 30 people on the left, our navigators, 30 people on the right, bomb aimer. I trained on tiger moths for elementary flying, and from there I went to Brandon, Manitoba, and trained on Cessna cranes for a while, and then that's when the big switch came from fighter pilots to bomber crews, and a group of us, at least there was about 4,000 of us, were sent to Quebec to train in other trades in the Air Force. I trained on Wellingtons, Sterlings, and Lancasters. The Lancaster, there were 7 on the crew. Well, there was the pilot, navigator, engineer, and 2 mid-upper gunner and a rear end gunner, and a navigator and a bomb aimer. I flew as a bomb aimer and a co-pilot on the Lancasters. I was flying in a mission over Germany, and the pilot passed out. He'd been on 2 days of holidays and overdid the fun. Anyways, he passed out, and he asked me to take over the plane, which I did, and we were close to the target then. So I just jettisoned the bombs and chose to come back on the outward route instead of taking the return route. I did that because I didn't want to, jeopardize the return route for the other planes who were flying in the group. Although I didn't see them because it was cloudy, but I knew they were there. I received a distinguished flying medal for taking over the plane on that flight. For regular bombing trips, at night especially, we had pathfinders would drop flares for indicating where the target was, and there was somebody on board would direct us as to where we should bomb in relation to the lights, in relation to the flares. And once we got near the target, closer to the target, the anti-aircraft fire usually was quite heavy, and when the heavy guns reached our height, it would bounce the plane around. It felt like sledgehammers hitting the plane. When we got back to base, we all went out to check the aircraft to see how badly it was damaged, and there was not a mark on it, so it was all blast that made the sound of hammers hitting the plane. In one mission where the shrapnel was quite intense, we thought we were being shot up, but as it turned out, it was just blast that hit us. However, a piece of shrapnel went through the tail end turret, and the shrapnel hit the machine gun and fell to the bottom of the turret, and the rear gunner was pretty happy that he had the gun there to protect him. And one of our bombing missions entailed bombing a gas field, and this was in Bordeaux, France. We were the leading plane. We flew in at 2,000 feet over the ocean until we got near the shore, and then we climbed to 16,000 feet, which was an ideal bombing height for that target. As a result, the entire gas field was obliterated, and the Germans had to move out of there. Most of the time I really was not scared, but there's one trip was quite exciting, and that was bombing Kiel. It was at night, and the target was all lit up with anti-aircraft fire and also searchlights. But as we approached the target, the density of the fires seemed less, so we were able to relax a bit. We bombed Stuttgart 2 nights in a row, and on one of the flights we got caught in the master searchlight, which normally is a clue for the fighters to zero in on you. So what we did, we immediately dove down from 22,000 feet to 3,000 feet, just missing the treetops. So Stuttgart was an exciting experience, but we got away quite well. The bombs were designed to lie at the bottom of the ocean, and they were designed to be triggered by any ocean aircraft going over there. We hoped that it would trip the bombs at the right time. Normally during wartime you wouldn't be allowed to disclose any of that.
Okay, but now it's declassified.
Now it's declassified, yes. I flew 33 missions, but I really call it 32 because the first flight was what we called a leaflet raid. It was designed to send propaganda to the French underground, and so therefore I just call it 32 flights. The 32 flights entail the bombing of the buzz bomb bases. Those were daylight raids, and the night raid. The night raids were usually on German cities, and that's the way we appreciated the daylight raids because they were like a piece of cake. The nighttime raids were usually over German cities, the larger cities. They were dangerous because of the anti-aircraft, and fighters, of course, would be trying to defend the city. And we were quite fortunate. We were only tailed twice by fighters at night, and we had a defensive maneuver which we called corkscrewing, and immediately we went into the corkscrew, and the fighters immediately broke off. They didn't like the whirlwind that was stirred up by the corkscrewing. The turbulence from the bombers would flip the fighters, so they didn't like to continue chasing us whenever. If they knew that if they knew that we knew they were there, they tended to break off. After the war, I was in a restaurant in Winnipeg, and I did an offhand Highland fling dance for the people, something that I really can't do. And that's my story. After I finished my first tour of operations, I felt felt relieved that we didn't have to fly over enemy territory anymore. And shortly after, I was sent home for a time of rest. My first stop was Gimli, Manitoba, and from there that was just a station they called it a rest station. And from there they sent me to Portage-la-Prairie. I was sent to Portage-la-Prairie as a navigation instructor to pilots, but I never did get a course to teach because I was released by then. One time when we were just finished the bombing the target, I saw a plane flying in our direction. I immediately thought it might be enemy, so I swerved the machine guns towards it, and of course I recognized it as our plane, and that was that. But the pilot, at the action of the turret swinging, suddenly he thought the front end of the plane had disintegrated. And he was quite a little bit angry about that. But in actual practice, if it had been an enemy plane, you haven't got time to ask the pilot if it's okay to swing the turret. We were training on the Isle of Man. We were given a regular fare of kippered herrings 3 times a day, and some Brussels sprouts may have been thrown into. However, that was the Isle of Man. Normally, on the mainland, the food rations were quite good. At the time of the war, it was expected of all young people to serve one of the forces, and I was glad that my choice was the Air Force. And some people thought it was a hazardous job, but I always thought that the other job, the Army and Navy, had it worse than we did. So I was quite happy with the way we were treated during the war. I found war unpleasant, and it's not something that I would choose to do unless it was required of the country. I'm glad that I did my part, and I'm not looking forward to do it again. And that's where we stand now. I was never really scared because there was no time to be scared. We had a job to do, and it kept us busy. Well, these bullets were so they were quite powerful, and they were able to take a lot of the German fighters out of the sky. They actually made the skies a lot safer for the other nations.
My grandpa's actually always been a pretty big part of my life and a lot of my interests as well. He, I was always somewhat into planes, and a lot of the time I'd be talking to him and kind of learning about his experiences in the war. Okay, so the one thing that actually always struck me was talking to him and about him receiving the Distinguished Flying Medal as well, is that it never really fazed him as something crazy that he had done or something that was a big deal. Like, even if it was just even if it was a fairly big award or any of that, even just all of his service in general, it was a job he had to do, and he did it, and that was all there was really to tell for him, and it was pretty crazy, just especially when you think in a modern context, just the amount of danger he was in while he's doing all this, and just when he reflects on it, it was it's just a job that had to be done, and I think that's says a lot about just his generation as well. So one of I think the coolest things was actually talking to Grandpa, and actually that I heard about somewhat recently was he talked about one mission that he found particularly boring was where they would go in his bomber, they'd fly over the English Channel, and they would load the Lancaster with basically thin strips of tinfoil, and they would drop it out of the bomb bay, and it would confuse enemy radar. It would make them think that there was a full bombing raid coming when there wasn't. And then what would happen was then they would scramble all the fighters to that place because they thought there was a bombing raid coming. And to Grandpa, he said that was one of the more boring missions we had to do. But when I was reading about them separately, they said it was one of the most dangerous things you could do because the entire enemy air force would be flying to this place where they think there's a full bombing raid, and there would just be one plane there, and Grandpa was in that plane, and he said, it's kind of one of the more boring things we had to do, and it was something kind of crazy just to hear. One thing actually about my Grandpa that I always found, well, actually I think is probably a good thing to kind of learn as a younger person, is everything he did was, it was a job that he did, and it was important, and he never really dwells on any of the things that happen, and I think that's very important. Like in no part of his life does he really talk a lot about he doesn't really dwell on any of the tough stuff. Like when he was in service, he talks a lot about he mentioned sometimes people didn't come back, and he leaves it at that. And he never really dwells on the bad stuff, but he really does. He talks fairly proudly about the service he did and the service he did for our country. But it was a thing that needed to be done. When I'm sitting next to my grandpa here, and he's, I think just over 80 years older than I am, it makes me realize how I don't have a lot of stories compared to him, and it actually makes me realize, just when, with people like him that are still around, it really is important to kind of, get the stories out of them while we can. And there's a lot of, because there's a lot of people that we couldn't, like a lot of people, especially in World War II, as Grandpa did serve, a lot of them didn't come back. So I think it's a good thing that the people that are with us, we learn as much as we can from them while they're still with us.
I believe in right and wrong, and I fought for what I believed was right. Encourage young people to have that attitude, to do what's right at all times. In Jesus' name, amen.